Hi everyone, good afternoon. My name's Amanda Annamalay Jochum and I'm Australia's Deputy Consul-General here in Los Angeles. So pleased to be here today with Erin Stam, who leads Ausfilm's Los Angeles office and is focused on attracting international productions to Australia. And we want to thank the Asia Society for hosting us here today at the 15th U.S. Asia Entertainment Summit to talk about screen production and incentives in Australia. And this really complements well Asia Society's global Season of Australia programs, which is happening from this September to January 2025, exploring Australia's cultural history and current affairs, and it includes policy discussions as well as performances. As we do in Australia, I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we are gathered, the Gabrielino and Tongva peoples, and I pay my respects to Indigenous people here today, as well as elders past and present. Now, on the screen, we've just seen the latest reel from Ausfilm, and it captures fantastically the range of box office hits filmed or produced in Australia, including The Fall Guy, Planet of the Apes, Furiosa, A Mad Max Saga, and Godzilla x Kong, The New Empire. And we see the success is driven by the creative and technical talent in Australia, world-class infrastructure, and competitive incentives. Now, recently, this year, with the passage of the Australian Screen Production Incentives, there are greater opportunities for growth, innovation, and partnership between Australia and the US in terms of our screen industries. And the incentives that we're going to talk more about today really build on Australia's landmark national cultural policy, we call it REVIVE, which is delivering new momentum for Australia's creative workers, our organisations, our audiences. Now, Australia's screen industry and international productions that we welcome support, jobs in Australia, quality jobs. It develops skills, attracts investments into our facilities and our capabilities, and it really brings our homegrown stories to global audiences. So with that, I want to turn to Erin, and can I invite you, Erin, to first of all tell us about the important role of Ausfilm, your organisation, in all of this, and then to tell us a little bit about the incentives offered by the Australian federal government.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me here. I think there's never been a better time to partner with Australia, so I'm really glad that we're here to be able to talk about this today. Ausfilm is funded by the Australian government to promote the incentives, locations, and capabilities in Australia. So we function as the Film Commission. As many of you would know that kind of operation. We talk to people about their projects, how they can work creatively. We're often speaking to them at an early stage about the money that's on offer, as well as locations and how things can get made in Australia. And then a little differently from other film commissions, we're a membership organization. And our membership includes federal, state, and local governments, soundstage facilities, and then service provider companies across Australia that would be the kind of companies that if you came to Australia, you might want to work with. They can include post, animation, sound, music, visual effects, legal, travel, aerial, scanning, on the forefront of technology, world-class companies. But I think often people are very interested in the money that we have on offer, so I'm sure that's what we want to delve into now.
Yes. I think, talking about these incentives, it might be good for us to kind of break it down for our audience today, starting with I thought we'd touch on the producer offset and official co-productions. So if you want to tell us a bit about the offsets, what's offered under this, and the eligibility criteria, perhaps that's where we can start.
Sure. So the producer offset is run by Screen Australia. This is for Australian productions or Australian-led productions, as well as official co-productions. Australia has treaties with 14 countries, so there's real possibility to do official co-productions to consider that. Under this incentive, you can get 40% for a theatrical feature or 30% for a non-theatrical feature or an other medium. It has no cap, it has no sunset. The minimum spend is 500,000 Australian, so it's quite reasonable. If an Australian production, the project would have to pass the significant Australian content test, which has 5 pillars, but it's mainly focused on it being an Australian story or creatively led by Australian creatives. But again, this incentive also covers official co-productions, and those co-productions do not have to pass the significant Australian content test. They just have to be under the official treaty rules.
Great. So we, in our work, Erin and mine, we're very privileged to highlight Australia's unique natural beauty, diverse locations, cosmopolitan cityscapes, at the same time also our world-class sound stages, talented cast and crew, all of the things you mentioned. And all of these things is what's drawing a lot of international productions to Australia. So Erin, maybe you can tell us a little bit about the benefits of our location offset, which is sort of the next category of offsets.
Well, we've had a real win in this area because we were able to pass legislation federally that set this at 30%. It has no sunset, no cap. This is for an international production that wants to come to Australia to shoot and to post. It pretty much covers all goods and services, anything that a production would want to do. It does have an eligibility criteria of 20 million Australian as a minimum spend, and for a series you need to spend at least 1.5 million average per hour. But I think that part of what's great about this is more productions can now look at Australia and say, hey, I want to bring the project there. You can bring the key talent from another country. You can bring the key crew as long as you hit those minimums. And again, now that it's legislated, it will be very hard for this to be moved in any other direction. So I think that gives us a lot of opportunity to grow the industry.
And so the last subset of our federal government incentives is the post-digital and visual effects, or PDV offset. Maybe you can tell us some of the recent films that have benefited from Australia's globally renowned PDV industry, and then, a little bit about the criteria for this offset.
Well, the great thing is you saw this reel, and the reel highlighted so many because part of our membership is visual effects. And so the visual effects industry in Australia is very, very robust and has worked on projects big and small, from the kind of studio features that you mentioned to little tiny budgets. The post-digital and visual effects, it also covers animation, which is a really big opportunity. It's 30% back. It has a minimum spend of $500,000. Again, no sunset, no cap, a tax rebate. So it's pretty easy to access. And projects often even just bring a small piece there. You can bring your full post, you can bring your full visual effects, but you can break it up into pieces. And we find that projects internationally often do that when they have a budget shortfall and they just want to get something done, and they can look at Australia for that incentive and the exchange rate, and it works out really easily.
So for those of you who are not so familiar with Australia, we actually have 6 states and 2 territories, much fewer than in the US. But most of our states and territories offer funding and incentives to attract production to be made in their area. So, Erin, how do these federal incentives interact with our state incentives?
I don't know why. I was just thinking about, there was this infomercial when we were kids, and they would say, like, and there's more. And I feel like that's now like, and there's more. So a project can only get one federal incentive of those 3 that I just mentioned, but state incentives can be added on top. So that, in terms of physical production, can often be 5 to 8%. But you can also separate out post-production, and that can be 10% to 20%. So there's real additional financial incentives in the state level. When you put those together, an average production is getting about 35 to 38% back and being in Australia, plus the exchange rate. And so it just becomes a really good financial way to make a project.
Thanks. So I think we've kind of covered very nicely our incentives. Thank you, Erin, for that deep dive into Australian screen production incentives. And it's clear that these really are going to be a game changer for our increased collaboration between the US and Australia. And, this is a partnership that we celebrate every year in our Good Day USA Arts Gala, which actually happens here, has happened here. So, we just want to say again, thank you to the Asia Society for providing us with this platform to discuss Australia's screen industry and production. And we're really looking forward to building on the momentum created by these incentives to foster creation between the US, Australia, and beyond. And If you want to discuss any particulars about the incentive or you have any questions, we will open the floor to questions, but also just for a little bit later on if you want to discuss anything with Erin and her team privately as well. So I'll open the floor firstly for any quick questions. I see a time sign at the back, but if you have a quick question, we'll take a couple. Table 13.
So the incentive for co-productions is the producer offset. It does not have to pass the SAC test. It just has to be an official co-production under the co-production rules between the two countries. And it's 40% for a theatrical feature, 30% for a non-theatrical feature, so feature for a streamer or another medium federally, and then you would add a state incentive on top.
Thank you so much.